Hi, everyone. This is Mallory Flowers on behalf of Jennifer Schaaf and Associates, and we are coming to you live from Washington, D.C., and welcome to our Webinar Wednesday series. We are hosting a full day of complimentary webinars every 30 minutes until 4:30 p.m. Eastern, and our speakers range from accountants to attorneys and other industry professionals. The full schedule is on our website underneath the webinar tab. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, and our speakers' contact info is posted on the last slide. So if you have any questions, please contact the speaker directly, and the recordings are on our website underneath the Archive Webinar tab as well as on our YouTube channel. And just a quick blurb about Jennifer Schaaf and Associates. We help both product and service companies with federal contracting. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles, including the GSA schedule. We can also help you with proposal writing and post-award contract administration. More information about our services can be found on our website. And these are a couple of our upcoming events that you can find more information about on our website or on these links. And we now offer advertising in our weekly newsletter and in our 2019 Webinar Wednesday series. Please contact me for more information. All right, so we're going to go ahead and dig into today's presentation, which is OTAs, what, why, and how. And Jody Reed is our speaker. Jody, I'm going to go ahead and hand over to you.
Hi, this is Jody Reed, and somehow, some way, I just lost your page, and I'm not sure how. So I'm going to just go ahead and keep going, and hopefully something will show up. So first slide, OTAs defined. Very, very odd. Anyway, other transactions is defined in the negative. There's no affirmative definition, and it's derived from the first instance of an OTA, which was the NASA Space Act back in the late 1950s. And it's stated in the NASA Space Act, in the performance of its functions, the administration is authorized to enter into and perform such contracts, leases, cooperative agreements, or other transactions. Next slide. So what an OTA is not? It's not a procurement contract. It is not a cooperative agreement. It is not a grant, nor is it a cooperative research and development agreement. However, it is a contract as that term is defined in general government contract language. Next slide. Some types and uses. Agencies can and do exercise OTA authority to fund research projects, including basic, advanced, and applied research. They may also use it, next slide, to do prototype projects. And it's the prototype projects that's right now getting the most attention, especially in the DoD environment, due to the amount of money that's involved there. There are also some agencies, such as the Transportation Agency, the TSA, that funds other activities with the OTAs. For example, they have been known to provide local, smaller airport authorities with the funding through an OTA for them to purchase the scanning equipment that they need for at the airport. Next slide. So what's the main purpose and benefit? Basically, what the OTA and why they came into being was they wanted to have companies who would not otherwise do business with the government for a whole host of reasons be willing to enter into an agreement with the government. When you start talking about research and development OTs, they're to be used when the government wants to encourage the development of new technologies for potential future use or to stimulate or support research. Prototype OTs, which is actually a form of procurement, may be used for prototype projects that meet the requirements of the authorizing authority. Next slide. Some additional benefits. It's to encourage commercial firms, which is defined as non-traditional defense contracting firms. And what's very interesting is what the definition into the DoD of what non-traditional defense contracting firms is. Basically, it's a contractor who is not currently performing or has not performed in the past year a contract with full cost accounting standards coverage. So if you're a small business and you're not full CAS covered, then you can get an other transaction agreement and you don't have to worry about some of the restrictions that are coming about because you're not considered to be a traditional defense contractor. It's also, one of the other benefits is to contribute to broadening of the technology and industrial base, and also to foster new relationships and practices that support national security. Most OTAs are being awarded to access what's referred to as cutting-edge technology. Next slide. Some other benefits is that it's not subject to procurement laws, even though a procurement OTA is a procurement, a prototype OTA is a type of procurement, it's still not subject to the procurement laws and regulations that are found in the Federal Acquisition Regulation or any agency supplements. The Competition and Contracting Act does not apply, although competition is strongly encouraged. The FAR does not apply, the DFARS does not apply, nor do any other agency-specific FAR supplement provisions. The Bayh-Dole, which deals with patent and trademark law, does not apply. Next slide. So why should you be interested? The Department of Defense is spending a lot of money using OTAs. On just a snapshot of a day, on November 11th, 2018, the Army announced it was planning to use an OTA for vehicle maintenance trainers for a total of $143 million. The two trainers they're using it for are the Bradley and one of the other armored vehicles. And basically, if you have competition for the prototype, not SECA level competition, but competition in general, then you can have a production contract, and there does not seem to be any limit on the size of the production contract, and it may be awarded as a sole source contract to whoever built the prototype. As you can well imagine, there's a lot of companies very, very interested in this. Moreover, the award of an OTA is generally not subject to protest at the GAO or the Court of Federal Claims, although the other transaction agreement might provide for an agency-level protest. Now, if anybody's been watching the news anywhere around here, you'll have seen there's been a couple of protests on OTAs. One protest was actually a protest of a prototype, of a production award from a prototype award, and the protest fundamentally was that the government had not followed the regulations when it did the prototype, when it did the production award, and the GAO agreed with them. And this, from their perspective, this was a new award, and that you still had to be compliant with the terms of the regulations. The other way where you can get a protest is if you protest before the first proposal is due, and what you're protesting is the fact that they're using another transaction agreement when in fact they should use some other form of agreement, which we've said they do not. That is not so. A procurement contract, a CRADA, or something else. Finally, nope. Next slide. So, what are the conditions for using an OTA? First of all, we talked about at least one non-traditional defense contractor or nonprofit research institution is participating to a significant event in the prototype project. So I don't know who's all listening in on here, but if you're a large business and you are considered a traditional defense contractor, then what happens is many of these organizations are combining with a lot of smaller companies. They are taking about a 45% share of the entire OTA, and the remaining 55% goes to non-traditional defense contractors, and as a result, everybody's able to get profit. Another condition is all significant non-federal government participants are small businesses, or at least 1/3 of the total cost of the prototype project is to be paid out of funds provided by the non-federal parties to the transaction. And once again, what we're talking about here is if you're a traditional defense contractor, then it behooves you're either going to end up paying 1/3 of the cost of the entire OTA, or you need to be making sure that the significant non-federal government participants are small businesses. Next slide. And finally, one that you are probably not going to see very often is a senior procurement official is willing to put in writing it's okay to enter into the OTA. Next slide. So there's only a few terms and conditions that are required by law. Not surprisingly, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is required, and basically this just says you will not discriminate against your employees or anyone else based on race, creed, color, sex, and all the other listings that goes into the Civil Rights Act. There is supposed to be an audit clause for prototype OTs, and by the way, that's a GAO audit clause for prototype OTAs over $5 million. But there are, in fact, ways to get around that as well. You are still not allowed to lie, cheat, bribe, or do any of the other things that might cause procurement ethics requirements, or really any other criminal law that you might do. You still can't violate the criminal laws. Beyond that, all the specific terms and conditions are negotiable. Next slide. That said, most agencies do not hand a blank sheet of paper to their contractors, whether it's an OTA or anything else. So what will happen is when you see an announcement for an OTA, as a general rule, what you'll see is what the agency thinks is its starting point for negotiations. And some things that they will include in there will be a default, will be management of the project, disputes, foreign access to technology, financing, all these kinds of things. You'll see the default language. However, you as a contractor have the opportunity to negotiate all of those, and it's just a matter of how your negotiation. And quite frankly, the more they want you, the more negotiation position you have, much like in any other kind of contract. The agreements officer is responsible, and that's what they're called, is responsible to ensure that the OTA incorporates good business sense and appropriate safeguards to protect the government's interest. So even though anyone who is a warranted contracting officer may sign off on an OTA, the practice from what I'm observing in most of the agencies is they're actually building a cadre of contracting officers who all they work with are OTAs, and they're getting extra training, and that's the group that is doing the most effort. Next slide. Some other things. There is no termination from convenience clause, and this is something that could not even come in under a Christian doctrine because the whole point of an OTA is that it's open-ended. You can have relatively quick approvals and funding. In fact, some OTAs, if the government has done all of its homework and everything else, from the time that the solicitation document is posted to actual award, can be up to and less than 90 days. You have the potential for upfront and milestone payments. As we indicated before, you might have the award might be subject to protest at the agency. You have a lot more protections with what happens to your results. There is not a requirement for publication of the results unless it's deemed to be basic research. And the government will enter into agreements more readily to protect company-sensitive information. They recognize the fact that in the commercial industry, the government coming back and saying, I won't sign a non-disclosure agreement does not give them a lot of comfort. And so you are seeing situations where potentially they might actually sign a non-disclosure agreement. Next slide. So some issues that you do need to address in the other transaction. Financial. Some of these are their audit rights. Is the agency going to have the right to audit, or is it just going to be the GAO audit right? It's all negotiable. Do they have third-party auditors, and is the government going to accept that? Does the company have a system of accounting that allows them to even be audited, in which case it's going to dictate what type of OTA you have? And by the way, all the various kinds of procurement contracts that you can have also as an OTA. So you can have firm fixed price. You can have cost plus fixed fee. You can have cost plus incentive fee. You can have all of those. How are the payments? Are they paid in arrears or are they paid in advance? What's the cost share? As we mentioned earlier, there might have to be a 1/3 cost share. And quite frankly, it's been written in a lot of different places. Money talks. In kind doesn't talk quite as loudly. Intellectual property. And what kinds of intellectual property we're going to create? How's it going to be allocated? Will the government allow the contractor to keep all rights to, well, they'll have ownership rights, but will the government take any rights or any licenses to the intellectual property created? Foreign access to information. OTAs are very much an American it's a way to help America. So they're generally, you can have a foreign entity get an OTA, but generally they're going to be awarded to U.S. companies only. And much like everything else, you're going to have to deal potentially with ITAR and export issues. Next slide. So how do you get an OTA? Basically, the government has three methods to solicit contractors: broad agency announcement, research announcements, and program solicitations. These are generally published on government websites, but they also may be published in any website or any other place where you might have it. So industry groups, university groups, anything like that. They have the freedom to publish it wherever. OTAs may be awarded directly to a contractor, and we've seen a lot of those. But even more often, we're seeing a consortium be set up that will handle the other transaction process. The consortium will award the other transaction. However, if the consortium awards the other transaction, it becomes subject to state law. It is not then the Disputes Act, the Contract Disputes Act, will not be applicable, or any of the other government disputes regulations. They become a matter of state law. And one of the things I'm seeing, unfortunately, is that some of these consortium agreements do not even mention what state law is going to be applicable, which could eventually cause problems in the future. Next slide. So some last thoughts. And this is coming from a memorandum for secretaries. The quote from, it was dated March 10, 2016. It was the Authority for Use of Other Transaction Authority. As a reminder, however, when a prototype project carried out under the authority of Section 2371B, which is the Other Transaction Authority for prototypes under DoD, is part of a major defense acquisition program or major automated information system, the requirements of DoD Instruction 5000.02 apply. Furthermore, appropriate oversight and processes shall be in place to ensure that the agreements officer do not bind the government into other transaction agreements that exceed their warrant authority as contracting officers, which, by the way, is a key point and something that you have to think about is you need to ask your agreements officer, especially given some of the dollar thresholds that are hitting on these things, what is their authority? And it's something that, because the vetting process has gotten a little bit more lax, shall we say, it needs to be done more often. And that agreements officers, next slide, have the business acumen, training, and experience needed to enter into other transactions that do not use the Federal Acquisition Regulation and DFARS supplement standard clauses and provisions. A couple other thoughts. One, just because the FAR and the DFARS do not apply does not mean that some of the clauses that are in there are not good clauses to use in another transaction. But instead of referencing the FAR or DFARS clause, what you're going to want to do is you're going to actually put the text. Another thing, just this past month, there has been a new other transaction guidebook put out by DoD. It's fairly extensive. It takes into account some changes that have come out of the Congress. And then the final thought is even though there has been a lot of writing that other transaction authority is going to probably go by the wayside if it gets abused, and I do agree in that sense, the current Congress seems to be very much enamored with other transaction authorities. And in all of the last three recent NDAAs, National Defense Authorization Acts, they have made this very clear. The one thing that they have added in the last Authorization Act is that they want the agencies now to report more to Congress what they're doing under other transactions. And that's probably one of the biggest things that they have added to the process. That's the end of my presentation. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me at the phone number and at the email address that's provided.
Thank you so much, Jody. Thank you for sharing your time with us today, and thank you for everybody who joined us. Like she said, contact her with the information you see on your screen if you have any questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.